Want to speak real Greek from your first lesson? Sign up for your free lifetime account at GreekPod101.com.
Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, how can I tell if a noun is masculine, feminine, or neuter? I get this question all the time. If the noun is in its dictionary form, in other words, in the nominative case, and is accompanied by a definite or indefinite article, then the article will indicate the noun's gender. Now, if the noun is not accompanied by an article, and especially when it is in an inflected form, then the gender might not be obvious. However, if you become familiar with the most common noun endings and declension patterns, you should be able to tell the gender in most cases. Let's get into more detail. First, let's see what are the most common masculine, feminine, and neuter noun endings. The following endings are the most common masculine endings in the nominative case. Os like ήλιος, sun. As like pateras, father. Is like μαθητής, student. Es like kafes, coffee. Us like papous, grandfather. And eas like kureas, barber. Some common feminine nouns have the following endings in the nominative case. Os like odos, street. A like mitera, mother. I like agapi, love. U like maimu, monkey. And O like iho, echo. The following endings are the most common neuter endings in the nominative case. Os like dasos, forest. O like nero, water. I like παιδί, child. Ma like pragma, thing. Imo like gráψιμο, writing. Sigma like phos, light. And ni like παρελθόν, past. Here are some sample sentences. Ο πατέρας και η μητέρα παίζουν με το παιδί τους. The father and the mother are playing with their child. Ο τουρίστας φωτογραφίζει μια μαϊμού στο δάσος. The tourist is taking pictures of a monkey in the forest. To follow this up, how can you tell the gender of os ending nouns? As you've noticed, the os ending can be found in nouns of all genders, so when you see this, you can't really guess the gender if there is no article or another helpful word around. However, here's a tip. If the noun is accented in the last syllable, you can be sure that this noun is not neuter. Another important thing to know is that there are many os ending nouns that are both masculine and feminine. Those usually denote a profession, such as o I γιατρός, doctor, or o I δικηγόρος, lawyer. Let's see some examples. Η γιατρός παρατηρεί τις ακτινογραφίες. The doctor is observing the x-rays. Ο δικηγόρος μιλάει στον δικαστή. The lawyer is speaking to the judge. Finally, what are some uncommon noun endings? There are only a few specific native Greek nouns that have uncommon endings, like the irregular masculine noun mis, muscle, ending in is, the neuter ipar, liver, and pir, fire, that end in ro, the neuter gala, milk, that ends in a, and the neuter oxy, acid, dori, spare, and imisi, half, that end in y. Also, the names of the letters of the alphabet are all neuter nouns, even the ones that end in a, like alpha and vita. Finally, there are many loan words that have not been adapted to the Greek declension system, so they don't get inflected, and they usually have uncommon or confusing endings, like the dual-gender indeclinable noun detective, ending in vita. So loan words will always be more challenging when it comes to guessing the gender. Here are two more examples. Το μωρό πίνει πολύ γάλα. The baby drinks a lot of milk. Οι detective παρακολουθούν έναν ύποπτο. The detectives are following a suspect. I'm sure after a lesson like this, you might be freaking out. But if you're a beginner or an absolute beginner, you don't need to know all of this right away. A tip that will make your life easier down the road is when you study vocabulary, focus on the endings of words and always memorize declinable words together with their articles, especially nouns. Do that at least for the os ending nouns or other nouns you feel you might get confused. Don't just memorize milk as gala. You should memorize it as to gala. Otherwise, you might mistake it for a feminine noun because it ends in a. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, when do you use iota, ita, epsilon, epsilon iota, omicron iota, and epsilon iota? At the very beginning, the proper spelling of Greek words is something that has to be learned and memorized in the same way that you learned how to spell words in your own language. You need exposure and lots of practice. For example, in English, you memorize that it is tree and not tree, and it's T and not T. In Greek, though, things become somewhat easier as you gain knowledge of declensions and conjugations, especially when that E sound is at the end of an inflected word. Let's get into more detail. First, let's see what you have to know if that E sound is at the end of a word. Inflected words in Greek, such as articles, nouns, adjectives, and verbs, usually follow specific ending patterns when inflected. If you know the patterns, then the E sound at the end of such words is predictable. Here are a few generally safe rules. Number 1. The plural forms of masculine and feminine os-ending nouns, as well as masculine os-ending adjectives and pronouns, will end in omicron iota. For example, οι ψήφοι καταμετρώνται από την Επιτροπή means the votes are being counted by the committee. Number 2. Words that end in ita are mainly feminine nouns and pronouns in the singular form and the plural form of neuter os-ending nouns. Number 3. Words that end in iota are usually neuter nouns. For example, το σκυλί σκάβει λάκκους στον κήπο means the dog is digging up holes in the garden. Number 4. The verb forms that have an E sound in the ending will be spelled with epsilon iota. The verb πληρώ, to fulfill, however, is an exception, as its E endings are spelled with omicron iota. Following up, what about epsilon and epsilon iota? The double vowel combination epsilon iota is very rare, and it's not something you'll find at the end of a word. It's only used in the word ios, meaning son, and its derivatives. For example, iikos, of or related to a son, υιοθεσία or υιοθέτηση, adoption, υιοθετώ, to adopt, and υιοθετημένος, υιοθετημένη, υιοθετημένο, adopted. As for the words that have an epsilon in the ending that is not part of the u, av, or ev sounds, they are also not that many, so they can be easily learned. The most common ones are the is ending adjectives like βαθύς, deep, βαρύς, heavy or strong, ελαφρύς, light, ευθύς, straight, μακρύς, long, παχύς, thick or fat, and polis, much or many, among others. Some nouns like asti, city, βράδυ, night, mys, muscle, δάκρυ, tear, δίχτυ, net, ισχύς, force, οξύ, acid, and στάχη, cob. Some adverbs like αντίκρι or κατάντικρι, opposite, μεταξύ, between, αναμεταξύ, among, and πολύ, very or too much or a lot. The pronoun εσύ, you. And finally, some foreign names like Sisi, Freddy, Vicky, and so on. Here are some sample sentences using words that are spelled with epsilon. Το βράδυ κάνει κρύο. At night it's cold. Ο καφές είναι πολύ βαρύς. The coffee is very strong. Finally, what if the E sound is not at the end of a word? In that case, you need to focus on the root or the roots of compound words, because the root might remind you of words you already know. For example, if you know how to spell ύψος, height, then all the words that begin with ύψος will be spelled with epsilon at the beginning. For example, υψόμετρο, altitude, υψηλός, tall or high, υψίπεδο, highland, ύψωμα, elevation, υψώνω, to raise, etc. Here are some sample sentences. Το χωριό βρίσκεται σε υψόμετρο 2.000 μέτρων. The village is located at an altitude of 2,000 meters. Μη μου υψώνεις τη φωνή. Don't you raise your voice at me. However, there will always be times that you will simply have no idea how to correctly spell a word you hear. Memorization will always be part of the learning process. It's just something that you shouldn't get too frustrated about. Write as much and as best as you can without feeling ashamed, even when you know you might be making a lot of mistakes. With enough time, practice, and study, you can and will perfect your spelling. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, when do you use omicron and omega? Like I mentioned in the previous video, spelling Greek words correctly requires memorization in combination with constant exposure to vocabulary and lots of practice. Since Greek has two different letters for the same O sound, let's see in what words you are most likely to see each one. We will be focusing only on the endings of inflected words though, since things there are easier if you have some basic knowledge of declension and conjugation. Let's get into more detail. First, let's see which words have omicron in their ending. The biggest category here are the os-ending masculine pronouns and adjectives and nouns of all genders. For example, αυτός, he, ο καθαρός, clean, ο βράχος, rock, η οδός, street, and το chaos, chaos. There are a few neuter nouns though that are spelled with omega instead, such as το καθεστώς, regime, το φως, light, το ημίφως, semi-darkness, and το λυκόφως, twilight. Here are some sample sentences. Ο δάσκαλος ξενυχτάει διορθώνοντας γραπτά. The teacher stays up late correcting tests. Ο κρύος καιρός συνεχίζεται. The cold weather continues. Other words that have omicron in their ending are O-ending neuter pronouns, nouns, and adjectives like ποιο, which, ποτό, drink, and καλό, good. On-ending neuter nouns and adjectives like παρόν, present, and ενδιαφέρον, interesting. Onas-ending masculine adjectives like μετριόφρονας, mediocre. Imo-ending neuter nouns such as βάψιμο, coloring or painting. All those os-ending singular genitive forms of pronouns, nouns, and adjectives such as του πράγματος, of the thing, του απόντος, of the absent, and κανενός, of no one. Exceptions are some of the e-ending feminine nouns that form the singular genitive in eos with omega, such as ignosi, knowledge, that becomes dysgnosios. All the verbs ending in a non-accented ome in the passive voice, such as σέβομαι, to respect. All the gerunds ending in a non-accented ondas, such as τρέχοντας, running. And the number δύο, 2. Finally, the words that have omega in their ending are the pronoun εγώ, I, the number οκτώ or οχτώ, 8, the o-ending feminine nouns such as πειθώ, persuasion, ηχώ, echo, φιδώ, thriftiness, and names such as κλειώ, ερατώ, ηρώ, αργυρώ, βασίλο, δέσπο, μάρο, βαγγελιό, κατερινιό, φρόσο, etc. The on-ending masculine and feminine adjectives such as o, e, ευγνώμων, thankful. All the plural genitive forms of declinable words such as αυτών, of them, των παιδιών, children's, των όμορφων, of the beautiful. The os-ending adverbs like ευτυχώς, luckily. All the verbs ending in an accented ome in the passive voice, such as εγιώμε, to guarantee. All the gerunds ending in an accented ondas, such as ζητώντας, asking. And finally, all the verbs that can be formed in the active voice will end in omega in the first person of the present tense. For example, παίζω, to play, μετράω, to count, and κολυμπώ, to swim. Here are some sample sentences. Δυστυχώς η Φρόσο και εγώ μαλώνουμε συνέχεια. Unfortunately, Froso and I fight all the time. Μπορώ να μετράω ως το 10 σε 8 γλώσσες. I can count to 10 in 8 languages. The general rules I've mentioned refer mostly to the dictionary forms of words. The inflected forms have a variety of endings, so it will always be necessary for you to know the declension and conjugation groups and the patterns of their endings. I hope this lesson was helpful and not too difficult or confusing. Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Yahara! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, how do you use Greek definite articles? Just like in English, we use Greek definite articles to talk about specific people, animals, things, or concepts, so they need to be defined. Greek has 3 different definite articles, o, I, and to, for the masculine, feminine, and neuter genders respectively. They are inflected, so their forms can change. An article defines a noun and it needs to always agree with it in gender, number, and case. However, instead of a noun, we could use any nominalized word or phrase to act like a noun. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see when we use the Greek definite articles. In Greek, we use them more often than their English equivalent, the. So while in English we say, I like tennis, in Greek we say, μου αρέσει το τένις. Literally, I like the tennis, because we are specifying which sport we like. We even use articles in front of days of the week, months, years, festivals, seasons, and proper names of places or people. For example, ο Γιάννης είναι εδώ. The John is here. However, when we address that person directly, we don't use an article and we form the name in the vocative case. For example, Yanni, έλα εδώ. John, come here. Notice how Yannis in the nominative case changed to Yanni in the vocative case. Here are some sample sentences. Ποιος είναι? Η Μαρία. Who is it? It's Maria. Την Κυριακή τα παιδιά πηγαίνουν εκδρομές. On Sunday, the kids go on excursions. Ο εκτυπωτής εκτυπώνει ένα έγγραφο. The printer is printing a document. Πήρε τηλέφωνο η γυναίκα. The woman called. Here are some more uses of the definite article. Number 1. Between a noun and the demonstrative pronouns αυτός, αυτή, αυτό. Ετούτος, ετούτη, ετούτο, and εκείνος, εκείνη, εκείνο. For example, αυτή η γυναίκα, this woman. Number 2. Between a noun and the adjectives όλος and ολόκληρος. For example, όλη η τάξη, the whole class, and ολόκληρος ο κόσμος, the whole world. However, ολόκληρος might not always require an article. For example, περιμένω ολόκληρες ώρες. I've been waiting for hours. Number 3. With a noun denoting something very specific followed by a possessive pronoun. For example, το βιβλίο μου, my book. Number 4. When talking about a rate. For example, 5 ώρες την ημέρα, 5 hours per day. Number 5. In sequences of nouns. For example, οι άντρες και οι γυναίκες, the men and women. Number 6. With abstract nouns, nouns denoting substances, and with nouns and adjectives in the plural when they denote a very specific entity. For example, η υπομονή είναι χρυσός. Patience is gold. Το ξύλο καίγεται εύκολα. Wood burns easily. And τα παιδιά είναι το μέλλον. Children are the future. Number 7. When we want to treat as a noun a different type of word or even a whole phrase. In that case, we use the neuter article. For example, τι θα φέρει το αύριο? What will tomorrow bring? Ποια είναι η σημασία του βλέπω? What's the meaning of to see? And το ότι καπνίζεις με απογοητεύει. The fact that you smoke disappoints me. Finally, let's see some cases where you don't need a definite article. The most common cases are with the subject or object of a sentence when we are talking about it generally or when we don't want to define it as something or someone specific. For example, υπάρχει περίπτωση ανθρώπου που γύρισε στη ζωή. There is a case of a man that came back to life. And πήρα αυτοκίνητο, I bought a car. Next, in predicates when we give an attribute to something or someone. Predicates are connected with the subject through a linking verb, like the verb to be. For example, αυτή είναι δασκάλα. She is a teacher. Finally, in similes after σαν, meaning as or like. For example, ψηλός σαν κυπαρίσι, tall like a cypress tree. No article is also used when talking about items or substances that have no specific amount. For example, το μωρό θέλει γάλα, the baby wants some milk. Here are some sample sentences. Ο γιος μου έγινε γιατρός. My son became a doctor. Πήρα προαγωγή. I got a promotion. It takes some time to get comfortable with all the uses of articles, as they might be affected by other parts of speech, such as prepositions. But I think the points I mentioned are the most basic and important ones to keep in mind when you are just starting to learn Greek. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά!
Want to speak real Greek from your first lesson? Sign up for your free lifetime account at GreekPod101.com.
Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, when do you keep the final ni of a word? Many students get confused when they see some Greek words that end in ni, sometimes omitting that final ni. For example, then and the, not. Mean and me, don't. Tin and ti, the, and so on. So they ask me why this happens. I will explain the rule behind this in hopes that it will help all of you puzzled learners of Greek. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see what does the final ni rule say and which words get affected by it. The rule says that the feminine words tin, the or her, stin, to the, aftin, her, and the particles then and mean keep that final ni when the next word begins either with a vowel or the consonants kappa, pi, taf, xi, psi, or the double consonant combinations b, d, g, t, and z. In any other case, they lose it. Mean also loses its final ni before a punctuation mark or a scholarly participle in some standard expressions. For example, mη, don't, and χώρος μη καπνιζόντων, non-smoking area. The masculine words ton, the or him, ston, to, in, or, at the, έναν, one, αυτόν, him, and the adverb σαν, as or like, always keep that final ni. This rule applies to written speech only. In oral speech, many Greeks assimilate the final ni with the next word's initial letter, so ni is often not heard. Check out our assimilation videos in the Ultimate Greek Pronunciation Guide series on GreekPod101.com. Here are some sample sentences. Αυτόν δεν τον ξέρω, I don't know him. Χρησιμοποιώ τη σκούπα, I use the broom. Following up, let's see why we keep the final ni in some words. The reason is simple. If we were to remove the final ni from the masculine words ton, ston, αυτόν, and έναν, they could be confused for neuter words, especially when they define a noun whose gender we are not sure of. So when we would see somewhere written τον νέο, without knowing the context, we wouldn't be sure if it's a neuter adjective, meaning the new, or a masculine noun in the accusative case, meaning τον νέο, the young man. Here are some more sample sentences. Ξέρεις τον νέο υπάλληλο? Do you know the new employee? Διαλέγω αυτόν και εκείνον. I choose him and him. Finally, there is one case where the current rule creates some uncertainty. By allowing us to write the, not, there might be cases where this negative particle might be mistaken for the conjunction the, roughly meaning however. For example, ο δάσκαλος μιλούσε, οι μαθητές δε γελούσαν. The teacher was talking, the students, however, were laughing. If the conjunction the would be mistaken for the verb's negation when reading, then the meaning would be different. The teacher was talking, the students weren't laughing. The problem is in written speech only, because in oral speech, the intonation helps make the distinction. This issue has created a lot of controversy among teachers, editors, and linguists, leaving students and other people confused. So some Greeks write then, always, while others follow the existing rule. I personally choose to always write then to avoid any confusion. Here are some sample sentences. Πρώτα γίνεται η συνέντευξη, κατόπιν δε γίνεται εξέταση. First, there's the interview. Later on, however, there's an examination. Δεν ξέρω τι να κάνω. I don't know what to do. Tip. If you have trouble remembering the rule's consonant letters, here's a cheat phrase that will help you remember them. Τσάι στην κατάψυξη και ένα bulldog στο jeep. Meaning, tea in the freezer and a bulldog in the jeep. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I hope this cheat phrase will help. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? If you can come up with any other cheat ideas, let me know in the comments. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, when should you use the nominative case? In everyday life, we see the nominative case, or ονομαστική πτώση in Greek, being used in dictionary and encyclopedia entries, listed items, and city names on street signs. But grammatically speaking, the nominative case in speech is used in three cases. Firstly, in the subject of a clause or sentence. Secondly, in the predicate of a subject. Thirdly, after some prepositions. This is the least common use of the nominative case. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see the first case, the nominative case in a subject. The subject of a clause or sentence answers the question who or what, or in Greek ποιος, ποια, ποιο, τι, and is always in the nominative case. For example, ο άνθρωπος είναι άρρωστος. Ποιος είναι άρρωστος? Ο άνθρωπος. The man is sick. Who is sick? The man. Another example is το σπίτι έχει δύο υπνοδωμάτια. Τι έχει δύο υπνοδωμάτια? Το σπίτι. The house has two bedrooms. What has two bedrooms? The house. Here are some more sample sentences. Ο Πέτρος είναι γιατρός. Peter is a doctor. Το τηλέφωνο χτυπάει. The phone is ringing. Following up, we have the nominative case being used in the predicate of a subject. The predicate of a subject in Greek is the part of a clause or sentence that is linked with the subject through a copular verb, also called a linking verb. The predicate of a subject always indicates a certain attribute the subject has, and in Greek it can be a noun, an adjective, a pronoun, a numeral, a passive voice participle, or even a whole phrase. If the predicate is a declinable word, then it is in the nominative case, although there may be some exceptions. Let's look again at the previous example. Ο άνθρωπος είναι άρρωστος. Τι είναι? Άρρωστος. The man is sick. What is he? Sick. Copular verbs in Greek are verbs of existence, such as είμαι, to be, γίνομαι, to become, υπάρχω, to exist, γεννιέμαι, to be born, πεθαίνω, to die, but also verbs such as φαίνομαι, to seem or to look, εκλέγομαι, to be elected, θεωρούμε, to be considered, λέγομαι or ονομάζομαι, to be called, and more. They come together with a predicate instead of an object because they are not transitive verbs. They just connect the subject of the verb to additional information about the subject. But having a copular verb in a sentence doesn't mean there will always be a subject predicate. For example, ο άνθρωπος είναι στο σπίτι. The man is in the house. The part in the house is a prepositional phrase expressing location. Its use is adverbial. It does not give the subject a special attribute. Therefore, it is not the subject's predicate. Here are some other sample sentences with copular verbs and predicates. Έγινα πατέρας. I became a father. Υπάρχει ένας ποταμός εδώ κοντά. There is a river nearby. Finally, we have the nominative case after prepositions. Most prepositions in Greek are combined with words in the accusative case and some with words in the genitive. but in some rare cases, the nominative might be used as well, especially after prepositions such as από, from, αντί, instead, and για, for. For example, έγινε από διευθυντής πρόεδρος. From a manager, he became a president. Αντί η Γιάννα να πάει Βασιλική. Instead of Joanna, let Βασιλική go. And περνιέσαι για έξυπνος. You think you are smart. Also in arithmetic, we use the preposition συν, plus, πλην or μείον, minus, επί, times, and διά, divided by, with nominative. For example, 5 μήλα συν 3 πορτοκάλια. 5 apples plus 3 oranges. Here are some more sample sentences with the nominative case after prepositions. Έγινε από δήμαρχος κλητήρας. From a mayor, he became a clerk. Δεν φαίνεται για δικηγόρος. He doesn't look like a lawyer. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά!
Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, what are the most common uses of the genitive case? In everyday life, we see the genitive case being used for female last names, in names of some areas, and in most street names when the latter two are named after someone or something. However, grammatically speaking, the genitive case in speech is used in many ways, some of which are as a direct or indirect object, or as an adverbial determiner completing the meaning of a verb, as a nominal determiner completing the meaning of a noun or an adjective, after some prepositions and adverbs. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see the genitive case as a direct and indirect object. Usually, direct objects in Greek are in the accusative case, and indirect objects are in the genitive. However, some verbs require a direct object in the genitive. Such verbs are verbs of expression like απευθύνομαι, to address, γνέφω, to wave, nod, εξομολογούμε, to confess, λέω, to say, μιλάω, to talk, and χαμογελώ, to smile. Verbs of sensations like αρέσω, to like, βρωμάω, to stink, ξυνίζω, to be sour, and μυρίζω, to smell. Verbs of ownership like ανήκω, to belong, and βρίσκομαι, to have, normally meaning to be located. Verbs that denote an association like αναλογώ, to correspond, μοιάζω, to look like, ταιριάζω, to match. Verbs that denote modality like αξίζω, to deserve, and χρειάζομαι, to need. Another example is σου μιλάω, I'm talking to you. Su here is the direct object of the verb in the genitive case. Now, when an object, direct or indirect, is in the genitive case, it usually answers the question σε ποιον, ποιαν, ποιο, to whom, when we refer to the action of the verb. For example, η μαμά μου έδωσε το βιβλίο. Σε ποιον έδωσε το βιβλίο? Σε μένα, μου. Mom gave me the book. To whom did she give the book? To me. Here are some sample sentences with the genitive case as an object. Η κοπέλα αυτή της μοιάζει πολύ. This girl looks like her a lot. Μου δίνεις λίγο το μολύβι σου? Can you give me your pencil for a second? Following up, the genitive case can be a nominal or an adverbial determiner. When a noun in the genitive case defines a different noun or an adjective that is not in the genitive case, then the noun in genitive is what we call a nominal determiner in genitive. Such a determiner might denote a lot of things, such as ownership, location, time, property, reason, matter, content, measurement, purpose, something that is part of a bigger group, family relationship, a creator, a simile, origin, comparison, close relation, volition, who or what does or receives an action, and separation. For example, πήγα στο σπίτι της Θωμαής. I went to Thomais' house. The house belongs to Thomais, so here the genitive expresses ownership. Next, when a genitive case defines a verb in an adverbial sense, it might indicate things such as time, reason, means, manner, and result. For example, θα επιστρέψει του χρόνου. He will come back next year. Here we are expressing time. Some related sample sentences are παρήγγειλα μια σαλάτα λαχανικών. I ordered a vegetable salad. And πεθαίνω της πείνας. I'm starving, literally dying of hunger. Next, the genitive case can be used after some prepositions and adverbs. The prepositions that are mostly combined with genitive, forming prepositional phrases, are some archaic ones, like άνευ, without, διά, by means of, εναντίον, against, εκτός, except, εκ or ex, from, εξαιτίας or λόγω, due to, μέσω, through, μεταξύ, between, προ, before, and υπέρ, in favor of. Be careful as some other words might come between the preposition and the word in genitive. Prepositional phrases define a verb and indicate things such as location, time, reason, opposition, origin, means, exclusion, etc., depending on the meaning of the preposition and the context. For example, ψηφίζω εναντίον σου. I vote against you. Here we are expressing opposition. Finally, sometimes an adverb may come before a word in the genitive case, indicating things such as location, time, manner, and separation. For example, θα είμαι πάντα κοντά σου. I will always be near you. Here we are expressing location. Some other sample sentences are είσαι εκτός θέματος. You're off topic. And πετάει για Αμερική μέσω Λονδίνου. He flies to America via London. These were some of the most common uses of the genitive case. For more uses and examples, check out our grammar bank on GreekPod101.com. If you have any questions, leave me a comment. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, when should you use the accusative case? In grammar, the accusative case is used in the following ways. First, to complete the meaning of a verb, either as a direct object, which is the most common use, less commonly as an indirect object, or as an adverbial determiner. Second, the accusative case can be used to complete the meaning of a noun or an adjective as a nominal determiner. And third, some prepositions may be followed by a word in accusative. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see the accusative case completing the meaning of a verb as an object. When an object, direct or indirect, is in the accusative case, it usually answers the question whom, ποιον, ποιαν, ποιο, or what, τι, when we refer to the action of the verb. For example, έχω έναν μαρκαδόρο. Τι έχω? Έναν μαρκαδόρο. I have a marker. What do I have? A marker. Here, the accusative έναν μαρκαδόρο is the direct object. Ακούω τη δασκάλα. Ποιαν ακούω? Τη δασκάλα. I listen to the teacher. Whom do I listen to? The teacher. The accusative τη δασκάλα is the direct object. Here are some more sample sentences. Συμπληρώστε τη φόρμα παρακαλώ. Fill in the form please. Έβαψα όλους τους τοίχους. I painted all the walls. Next, an accusative can define a verb in an adverbial sense, indicating things such as time, location, duration, manner, amount, reason, and purpose. For example, το μωρό κοιμάται την ημέρα. The baby sleeps during the day. Here the accusative την ημέρα expresses time, answering the question of when. Following that, the accusative case can be a nominal determiner completing the meaning of a noun or an adjective. Although rare, this happens when a noun in the accusative case defines a different noun or an adjective. The noun in the accusative then might denote the following things. Number 1. Reference. Το δωμάτιο είχε 4 μέτρα μήκος. The room was 4 meters long, in reference to the length. This happens usually with words such as makros or mikos, length, platos, width, vathos, depth, and ύψος, height. Number 2. Measurement. Πήδηξε έναν τοίχο 2 μέτρα. He jumped a 2-meter wall. Number 3. Content. Έπεσε σε ένα λάκκο γεμάτο λάσπες. He fell in a puddle full of mud. This happens usually when the adjectives γεμάτος, full of, and όλος, also meaning full of. Number 4. To whom or what an action goes, called objective accusative. Προσοχή τα χέρια σας. Mind your hands. This accusative, in this case τα χέρια, answers to what. So, mind what? Your hands. This happens usually with nouns coming from verbs that express a command, a wish, or exhortation. Here are some more sample sentences. Η πισίνα εδώ έχει 2 μέτρα βάθος. The pool here is 2 meters deep. Αγόρασα ένα σακί πατάτες. I bought a bag of potatoes. Finally, we use the accusative case after certain prepositions. The most common ones are από, from, με, with, σε, to, in, on, at, για, for, ανά, per, παρά, despite, ήσαμε, up to, πριν, before, σαν, as or like, ως or μέχρι, until, χωρίς or δίχως, without, προς, towards or to, μετά, after, and κατά, during. Note that se always gets contracted in front of articles. For example, se plus ton becomes ston. Prepositional phrases define a verb in an adverbial sense to indicate things such as location, time, reason, purpose, result, reference, condition, opposition, origin, amount, means, manner, escort, property, etc. For example, είμαι στην παραλία. I'm at the beach. Here, the prepositional phrase with accusative στην παραλία expresses location. Note that sometimes other words might come between the preposition and the word it defines. For example, το φόρεμα είναι από το μαγαζί της Σούλας. The dress is from Sula's store. But changing the word order, we might get το φόρεμα είναι από τη Σούλα στο μαγαζί. So don't get confused. The prepositional phrase here is από plus το μαγαζί, although της Σούλας in genitive comes in between. Here are some more sample sentences. Η κόρη μου σπουδάζει στην Αμερική. My daughter is studying in the US. Αυτό είναι για εκείνο. This is for him. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? If you would like to learn more about the accusative case, as well as take a look at some more examples, check out our grammar bank on GreekPod101.com. And if you have any questions, leave me a comment. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, how can you tell a weak possessive pronoun apart from a weak personal pronoun or an article? Greek weak possessive pronouns use the same forms as the weak personal pronouns in the genitive case. Those are μου, my, σου, your, του, his, της, her, μας, our, σας, your, and τους, their. So depending on the use, all of these forms can denote either ownership or a person, such as me, you, him, her, etc. Furthermore, tu, tis, and tus could also be definite articles meaning the. Although they look confusing, it's actually easy to tell them apart. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see how to spot a weak possessive pronoun. Unlike articles that are placed right before a noun, a weak possessive pronoun will come after it. For example, ο αδερφός μου, my brother. But when there is an adjective defining the noun, there can be 3 options. Let's examine the example, my little brother. In Greek, we may have ο μικρός ο αδερφός μου, adjective with article plus noun with optional article plus pronoun. It can also be ο μικρός μου ο αδερφός, adjective with article plus pronoun plus noun with optional article. And finally, we can have ο αδερφός μου ο μικρός, noun with article plus pronoun plus adjective with article. As you can see, the possessive pronoun will either precede the noun and its article or follow it. Here are some sample sentences. Το σχολείο μας είναι το μοναδικό στην περιοχή. Our school is the only one in the area. Κάνεις τα μαθήματά σου? Are you doing your homework? Following up, let's see how to spot a weak personal pronoun in genitive. Personal pronouns in general will usually come before a verb, but they will follow a gerund or a verb in the imperative. For example, μου έδειξες, you showed to me. Δείχνοντάς της, showing to her. Δείξε μου, show me. Here are some sample sentences. Τη βοηθάω με τις δουλειές του σπιτιού. I'm helping her with the household chores. Πες μου την αλήθεια. Tell me the truth. Sometimes another weak personal pronoun in accusative may come between the pronoun in genitive and the verb. But with gerunds and imperatives, the pronoun order is flexible. For example, μου την έδειξες. You showed her to me. Δείχνοντάς μου την, or δείχνοντάς τη μου, showing her to me. Δείξε μου την, or δείξε τι μου, show her to me. Weak personal pronouns in genitive may also come after adjectives in the comparative and relative superlative degree, numerals, the adjective olos, and certain pronouns and adverbs, usually adverbs of place. Some examples are καλύτερό σου, better than you. Το καλύτερό μας, the best of us. Οι τρεις σας, the three of you. Όλοι τους, all of them. Μόνη της, on her own. Πάνω μου, on me. Finally, we'll see what more you need to know in order not to confuse these two types of weak pronouns. Sometimes you might see a weak pronoun in the genitive case between a noun and a verb. For example, η δασκάλα μου είπε. So, is it my teacher said or the teacher told me? Well, mu here is possessive because, according to grammar, personal pronouns need an accent mark when they can be confused for possessive, unless a proparoxytone word, in other words, accented in the third to last syllable, precedes. So if we had η δασκάλα μου είπε, mu would then be personal, the teacher told me. When a proparoxytone word precedes a personal pronoun, then we don't use an accent mark. For example, ο πρόεδρος μας είπε. The president told us. But if that pronoun is possessive, then we pronounce the pronoun closely with the word before it and add an accent mark to the last syllable of the word. Ο πρόεδρος μας είπε. Our president said. When this happens, that possessive pronoun is called enclitic. Notice the different voice tone in each case. Ο πρόεδρος μας είπε. Ο πρόεδρος μας είπε. Here are some sample sentences. Η μητέρα μας μίλησε και ύστερα βγήκε έξω. Mother talked to us and then she went out. Το αυτοκίνητό μου θέλει συντήρηση. My car needs maintenance. Now something extra to know. When we have a repeated weak form, for example, ο πατέρας μου είπε, my father told me, adding an accent mark is not necessary because there can be no confusion. The possessive pronoun goes after the noun and the personal pronoun before the verb. However, you might see some people adding an accent mark to the second form to show that the repetition is not a typo, like in ο πατέρας μου είπε. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά!
Want to speak real Greek from your first lesson? Sign up for your free lifetime account at GreekPod101.com.
Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, why do some words get two accent marks? Greek has a golden rule. All words get accented in one of the three last syllables. Monosyllabic words are naturally stressed when pronounced, so we don't accentuate them, although there are a few exceptions. But sometimes, before some specific monosyllabic words, other monosyllabic words do get accented, while some polysyllabic words get a second accent mark. When this happens, we pronounce these words closely together, stressing all the accented syllables. This phenomenon of developing an extra stress is called enclisis, and the monosyllabic words that cause this are called enclitics. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see which monosyllabic words are enclitic words. In modern Greek, those are the weak forms of the personal and possessive pronouns, such as me, mu, se, su, ton, tu, tin, tis, to, mas, sas, tus, tis, tes, and ta. Although these monosyllabic pronouns normally don't get an accent mark in written speech, except for some special cases that we mentioned in our previous video, We do stress them in oral speech. When these words cause enclisis, their stress moves to the last syllable of the word before them. Let's see some examples. Η πρόοδος του είναι αξιοσημείωτη. His progress is remarkable. Η γειτόνισσά μου είναι πολύ ενοχλητική. My neighbor is so annoying. So now let's see when enclisis happens. The first case is when we have a proparoxyton noun or adjective, in other words, a noun or adjective accented in the third to last syllable, followed by a monosyllabic possessive pronoun such as μου, σου, του, my, yours, his, etc. Then the stress of these pronouns moves to the last syllable of the proparoxyton word, so we add a second accent mark over that syllable. The two words are then pronounced closely together, stressing the two accented syllables. For example, το παράθυρό μου, my window. Let's see a sample sentence. Η γη γυρίζει γύρω από τον άξονά της. Earth rotates on its axis. Note that the personal pronouns in genitive can also cause enclisis after a proparoxyton adjective in the comparative and relative superlative degree. For example, χειρότερός μου, worse than me. Ο χειρότερός μας, the worst from us. Here's a sample sentence. Ο Λάκης είναι ο μεγαλύτερός μας. Lakis is the oldest of us. The second case of enclisis is when we have a proparoxyton gerund or verb in the imperative, followed by a weak personal pronoun which works as an object in the phrase. For example, μοίρασέ τα, share them, and βλέποντάς την, seeing her. Here are some sample sentences. Μάζεψέ το αυτό που πέταξες κάτω. Pick up what you dropped. Δεν καταλαβαίνω τι μου λες. Γράψε μου το. I don't understand what you are saying. Write it for me. The third case is when we have a proparoxyton adverb followed by an enclitic word. For example, απέναντί σου, opposite from you. Finally, I should mention another case of enclisis, which is when we have a paroxyton imperative, in other words, accented in the second to last syllable, followed by two personal pronouns that work as objects. For example, δώσε τους το, give it to them. Here, the stress of the last pronoun, which is to, moves to the previous syllable, which is the pronoun tu. The logic is that the basic stress of the word δώσε is more than 3 syllables away from the end of this group, that is closely pronounced as if it's one word, breaking the golden rule I mentioned at the beginning. So we need to add an additional stress in order to make the speech sound natural. That extra stress is marked with an accent mark, despite the fact that it falls on a monosyllabic word. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, when should you use the personal pronoun μου in genitive and when do you use me in accusative? Weak personal pronouns such as μου in genitive or me in accusative, both meaning me, will usually come before a verb or after a gerund or a verb in the imperative and will denote a direct or indirect object. The vast majority of Greek transitive verbs require a direct object in the accusative, although there are a few verbs that require a direct object in genitive. So whether you use μου or me for a single direct object depends on the type of verb you have. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see which type of verbs get a direct object in genitive. Verbs of expression, like απευθύνομαι, to address, πνέφω, to wave, nod, εξομολογούμε, to confess, λέω, to say, μιλάω, to talk, and χαμογελώ, to smile. Verbs of sensations like αρέσω, to like, βρωμάω, to stink, ξυνίζω, to be sour, and μυρίζω, to smell. Verbs of ownership like ανήκω, to belong, and βρίσκομαι, to have, normally meaning to be located. Verbs that denote an association like αναλογώ, to correspond, μοιάζω, to look like, and ταιριάζω, to match. Verbs that denote modality like αξίζω, to deserve, and χρειάζομαι, to need. Some examples are μου λέει, he, she, it, tells me. Μου αρέσει, I like. Μου αξίζει, I deserve. Here is a sample sentence. Μου μυρίζει ένα ωραίο άρωμα. I smell a nice perfume. This direct object in genitive can usually be replaced by a similar prepositional phrase using a preposition such as με, with, σε, to, in, on, at, or από, from, etc., plus accusative. For example, αυτός μου λέει, he tells me, is the same as αυτός λέει σε εμένα. Here the personal pronoun changes from the weak form μου to the strong form εμένα after the preposition. A sample sentence with a similar prepositional phrase is αυτό ανήκει σε εμένα. This belongs to me. This can also be rephrased as αυτό μου ανήκει, using a weak personal pronoun in genitive and still mean the same thing. Now, with any other transitive verbs apart from those special ones that I mentioned before, we use the weak personal pronouns in accusative as a direct object when needed. For example, με βλέπεις, you see me. Με ενοχλείς, you annoy me. Με ακουμπάς, you touch me. In addition to having a single direct object, some verbs get an indirect object as well. For those, if the direct object is not a phrase, it will always be in accusative, even if the verb is one of those that require a direct object in genitive. The indirect object can then be number 1, in genitive or a similar prepositional phrase. Number 2, another accusative. Let's see an example. Μου λέει μια ιστορία. She is telling me a story. Here, μια ιστορία, a story, is the direct object in accusative answering to what, and μου is the indirect object in genitive answering to whom. Μου could also be replaced by the prepositional phrase σε εμένα, to me, without changing the meaning. Λέει μια ιστορία σε εμένα. She's telling a story to me. Here are some more sample sentences. Ο κηπουρός μου φροντίζει τον κήπο. The gardener is cleaning the garden for me. Οι γονείς μου δίνουν χαρτζηλίκι. My parents give me pocket money. You may be wondering now, how can you know which case to use with your indirect object pronoun? It depends on the verb, as some verbs require the genitive and some others the accusative. Let's see an example. The nurse is feeding me soup. If you are not sure whether to say η νοσοκόμα με ταΐζει σούπα or η νοσοκόμα μου ταΐζει σούπα, a relatively safe tip is to try replacing me with a matching prepositional phrase like to me and see if it sounds right. If it doesn't, like in this case, don't use a genitive like μου. Instead, use an accusative like με or its strong form εμένα. So the correct sentence is η νοσοκόμα με ταΐζει σούπα or η νοσοκόμα ταΐζει εμένα σούπα. Remember, a weak object pronoun in accusative like με can usually be replaced by its equivalent strong form in accusative like εμένα, while a weak pronoun object in genitive like μου can be replaced by a preposition plus its equivalent strong form in accusative like σε εμένα, to me. Here are some related sample sentences. Η κυρία Αγγελίδου διδάσκει εμένα ιστορία. Mrs. Αγγελίδου teaches me history. Η κυρία Αγγελίδου με διδάσκει ιστορία. Mrs. Αγγελίδου teaches me history. Sometimes using the wrong case changes the meaning of what you are trying to say, resulting in interesting sentences. For example, σου μαγειρεύω, I cook for you. Su in genitive here indicates an indirect object as it is implied that I'm cooking for you something else, a direct object, like food, which is omitted here. But if we had σε μαγειρεύω, where σε is in accusative case, indicating a direct object, the meaning changes to I'm cooking you. So if you don't want to sound like a cannibal, make sure you use the right case in a sentence like that. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, why does the word Poli sometimes have different forms? This is something I get asked a lot. What you need to know about Poli is that there are two types. First, there's the adverb Poli, meaning very, very much, or a lot. And second, there's the declinable adjective o polis, I poli, to poli, in the masculine, feminine, and neuter gender respectively, meaning many for measurable things, or much for non-measurable things, like the noun knowledge, for example. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see the first type, where poli is an adverb. In this case, it is not declined, and it can be used in combination with verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and participles. For example, χιονίζει πολύ, verb plus πολύ, it's snowing a lot. Τρώω πολύ γρήγορα, πολύ plus adverb, I eat very fast. Είναι πολύ καλός άνθρωπος, πολύ plus adjective, he's a very good man. Είναι πολύ εκνευρισμένος, πολύ plus participle, he's very irritated. Many people, including native Greeks, misspell it because they confuse the adverb with the adjective o polis, I poli, to poli, meaning many or much. Here are some sample sentences. Σ' αγαπώ πολύ. I love you very much. Το ίντερνετ εδώ είναι πολύ αργό. The internet here is very slow. Following up, the adjective is declined in all three genders and is always used to define a noun. Therefore, it always needs to agree with the noun's gender, number, and case. Let's see some sample sentences. Εδώ υπάρχει πολύς θόρυβος. There is too much noise here. Τρώω πολύ σοκολάτα. I eat a lot of chocolate. Πέφτει πολύ χιόνι. It's snowing a lot. Έχεις πολλούς μαρκαδόρους. You have many markers. Η Μαρία έχει πολλές τσάντες. Mary has many handbags. Έχω πολλά παιδιά. I have many children. Keep in mind that in the plural, the adjective is spelled with double lambda. For example, σου το είπα πολλές φορές. I told you many times. And πέρασαν πολλά χρόνια από τότε. Many years passed by ever since. If you are unsure of which type of poli to use, just think of the word that it will be defining. If it's a noun, then you need to use the adjective type in the correct form. If it will be used to define any other word, then you need to use the indeclinable adverb. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, why does the word Ligo sometimes have different forms? Just like with the word poli that we saw in the previous lesson, Ligo has two types as well. First, there's the adverb Ligo, meaning a little or a bit. And second, there's the declinable adjective or ligos, I ligi, to ligo, in the masculine, feminine, and neuter gender, respectively, meaning a little bit, some, for non-measurable things, like the noun love, for example, and a few for countable things. Let's go into more detail. First, let's see the first type, where Ligo is an adverb. In this case, it is not declined and it can be used in combination with verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and participles. Some examples are βρέχει λίγο, verb plus λίγο, it's raining a little. Περπατάς λίγο γρήγορα, λίγο plus adverb, you walk a bit fast. Το φαγητό είναι λίγο πικάντικο, λίγο plus adjective, the food is a bit spicy. Ήταν λίγο λυπημένος, λίγο plus participle, he was a bit sad. This adverb can also be expressed in the diminutive form λιγάκι to mean a little bit. For example, η θάλασσα είναι λιγάκι κρύα, λιγάκι plus adjective, the sea is a little bit cold. Here are some more sample sentences. Περίμενε με λίγο, wait for me a little, and δεν είναι λίγο ακριβό, isn't it a bit expensive? In the second case, where Ligo is an adjective, it is declined in all three genders, masculine, feminine, and neuter, and it is always used to define a noun, so it always needs to agree with the noun's gender, number, and case. Let's see some examples. Υπάρχει λίγος κόσμος εδώ. There are a few people here. Πέφτει λίγη βροχή. It's raining a little. Τρώμε λίγο φαγητό. We are having some food. Η εταιρεία αυτή έχει λίγους υπαλλήλους. This company has a few employees. Έχω λίγες φούστες στην γαρνταρόμπα μου. I have a few skirts in my wardrobe. Καταλαβαίνω λίγα ελληνικά. I understand a little Greek. Here are some more sample sentences. Ρίξε λίγο αλάτι παραπάνω στη σούπα. Add a little bit more salt to the soup. And πάρε λίγες κόλλες χαρτί και μοίρασέ τες. Take a few sheets of paper and pass them around. Basically, if you are not sure which type of Ligo to use, just think of the word that it will be defining. If it is a noun, then you need to use the adjective type in the correct form. If it will be used to define any other word, then you need to use the indeclinable adverb. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά! Hi everybody, Stefania here. Welcome to Ask a Teacher, where I'll answer some of your most common Greek questions. The question for this lesson is, are the nouns for professions the same for the masculine and feminine gender? The answer is, not always. You may have seen nouns of professions such as γιατρός, doctor, and δικηγόρος, lawyer, that remain the same for the masculine and feminine gender. For some of those, the reason is that in the past, it was unthinkable for women to become doctors or lawyers. So today, some professions use the masculine form for the feminine gender as well. However, there are many professions that have their own feminine forms as well. The percentage is around 50-50. Are there any rules that help us convert a masculine profession noun into the feminine form? Actually, no. Learning the feminine profession noun is a matter of memorization. Apart from the nouns that are identical for the two genders, there are three ways that the feminine profession nouns are created. Number 1. By replacing the masculine ending with the feminine one. For example, ο αθλητής, η αθλήτρια, athlete. Number 2. By using a completely different word. For example, ο κουρέας, η κομμότρια, barber, hairdresser. Number 3. Periphrastically. For example, οι γυναίκες πιλότοι, female pilots. This is used mainly for the plural feminine versions of the two gendered nouns because, although in singular the article helps distinguish the genders, for example, ο πιλότος, masculine, η πιλότος, feminine, in plural the article is identical for the two genders, οι πιλότοι, masculine and feminine. Here are some sample sentences. Όταν μεγαλώσει, θέλει να γίνει αθλητής. When he grows up, he wants to become an athlete. Είναι δύσκολο να βρεις μια καλή κομμότρια. It's difficult to find a good hairdresser. Now, let's see some common feminine profession noun endings. The first category we shall see are the masculine os ending profession nouns. Here, the vast majority of the nouns are identical for both genders. For the rest, some common feminine endings are ίσα, like ο καπετάνιος, η καπετάνισσα, captain. Ίνα, like ο αστυνομικός, η αστυνομικίνα, police officer. And a, like ο νοσοκόμος, η νοσοκόμα, nurse. The endings ίσα and ίνα are sometimes alternative endings. However, they sound very informal and sometimes they are inappropriate for standard or formal speech. For example, it's more common to say η αστυνομικός than η αστυνομικίνα, police officer. Here are some sample sentences. Ο καπετάνιος είναι ο τελευταίος που εγκαταλείπει το πλοίο. The captain is the last to abandon the ship. Όλες οι νοσοκόμες ήταν καλές μαζί μου. All the nurses were nice to me. The second category are the masculine as ending profession nouns. Here, around 1/3 of the nouns are identical for both genders and more than half are masculine nouns that end in istas, which form feminine versions in either ista or istria, like ο αρτίστας, η αρτίστα, artist, and ο γραφίστας, η γραφίστρια, graphic designer. Only a few feminine nouns of this category may end in isa. The final category is the masculine is ending nouns. Here, the masculine nouns that end in tis and that they derive from a verb form feminine nouns ending in tria, like ο εργάτης, η εργάτρια, worker, deriving from the verb εργάζομαι, to work. Furthermore, the masculine nouns that end in zis form their feminine counterparts in zou, like ο ταξιτζής, η ταξιτζού, taxi driver. The rest usually form the feminine nouns ending in isa. A few have the alternative scholarly ida and is endings, while some share the same form. Here are some sample sentences. Οι εργάτες κάνουν απεργία. The workers are on a strike. Η επαγγελματίας γραφίστρια σχεδιάζει ένα λογότυπο. The professional graphic designer is designing a logo. Of course, not all professions are expressed with single noun words. There are many professions that consist of either two nouns or an adjective and a noun. In the first case, the feminine versions of both nouns rely on what we discussed in this video. For example, ο αναπληρωτής καθηγητής becomes η αναπληρώτρια καθηγήτρια, substitute teacher. In the second case, the adjective will always agree in gender with a noun. For example, ο κοινωνικός λειτουργός, η κοινωνική λειτουργός, social worker. How was the lesson? Pretty interesting, right? Do you have any more questions? Leave them in the comments below and I'll try to answer them. Γεια χαρά!